So good morning and welcome to the eVoiceNet Working Group for Roundtable, the vocal biomarkers path to the European market. The science behind voice AI is moving fast, as was told yesterday several times, but taking a tool from academic environment or academic lab to the and turning it into certified and adopted technology in hospitals. It's in Europe, it's a completely different story, different hurdle. Today, we are here to bridge this world of the research, academic, clinical, pharma trials, and medical devices to the daily hospital practice workflow. And we will have 60 minutes, and our agenda is broken to the following sequence. So just to have a brief knowledge about how we will follow today. We will start with the introduction, and then we will follow with the online keynote from Roche. It will be online for the 10 minutes. After that, we will continue with the first round of the thematic block, focusing on specific validation, requirements, and differences between the clinical trials, medical devices. After the first round, we will have the open question from the audience, so feel free to communicate with us. This is the round table. Even though we are not like everybody we are the one table, but we have like a lot of round tables here, so please feel free to ask any questions. After that, we'll go to the second block, which will be the heavy stuff, the overcoming barriers, how to put everything to the practice. And once again, it will be a place for questions. And at the end, we will have a lightning round with the key takeaways or takeaways for you, what we should do as a community together differently, or maybe in a more common sense. So before I will pass the word to the panelists, let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Jan Mucha. I am a data scientist and CEO of the company Psyche, where we are developing system Phonafix. We are basically a startup trying to improve the quality of the diagnosis and therapy of the speech disorder in a clinical environment. So we are developing a medical device, and currently we are in a phase of the certification, and we are trying to overcome the market barriers. So this is from our perspective. And the last thing before I will pass the introduction to the panelists is, please, how many of you are clinicians from the clinical or hospital environment? Okay, so few. How many of you are researchers from the academic research? The majority, of course. And how many of you are entrepreneurships from the startups and other companies? Okay, so I see some like overlapping knowledge here, so I believe that it will be really useful for you. So please, Mireille, if you can introduce yourself and what are you doing, what is your current?
Yeah. So I'm Mireille Müller. I'm actually from Luxembourg, but I don't live in Luxembourg because I used to work previously for Novartis in Basel. So I'm living close to Basel normally. And I'm a regulatory lead now for a startup also, which is focusing on digital measures. I have I've spent most of my career in big pharma at Novartis, 22 years, and also the predecessor of Sanofi. So I have a quite long regulatory career in big pharma. But yeah, enjoy a lot the regulatory affairs. It's an interesting field which is evolving constantly. So you have always new things to learn.
Thank you. Julia?
I'm Julia Hoxha. I'm co-founder and CEO of Sana. We are a health tech company based in Germany. Our office is in Berlin. We have developed biomarker focusing on the cardiorespiratory domain, which we are now also commercializing, bringing to the market as MDR. And this is something I'd really like to share with you, like the struggles and maybe lessons learned. On the side, I also lead the working group Health, the German AI Association, which is the biggest network of companies producing and delivering building AI solutions. Also tied to the European AI Forum, also the biggest network on AI in Germany. My background is in engineering, but since I kind of, let's say, left academia and went to the startup world, I've also ventured other companies, so I can share some more from the, let's say, entrepreneurship careers and lessons.
Thank you very much. Sami?
Yeah, I'm Simon Simmons. I'm a sinus physician. I have a background in medicine, so I'm a pulmonologist. And a couple of years ago, I started implementing digital tools in hybrid care pathways. And so I know a bit how to implement digital tools. I shifted more focus into vocal biomarkers, and my goal is I'm PI of a consortium to really like say get the vocal biomarkers into the domain of care. So that's I hope I'm come to share my experiences how to do this from idea towards implementation.
Excellent, thank you. And Amanda?
My name is Amanda Brahari. I'm originally Greek. I live in Abu Dhabi. I'm a speech and language pathologist, and I've been in the field for the last 20 years in hospitals and private settings, acute and outpatient. I've worked in everywhere in terms of the practice, and I have a specialization in voice. I have transitioned over the last years into developing solutions in cognitive strain and fatigue and focusing on voice biomarkers. And where I'm very interested is to bridge the gap between science and commercialization. What can we bring in real life, not just staying in a lab? That's my passion.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, Vencisław Lobe from Roche. So please, then you can introduce yourself, share your screen, and start with your keynote. The floor is yours.
Yeah, hello everyone. I hope you can hear me. I'm sorry I'm not there, but I'm traveling. I work for Roche, and I'm leading a team of study managers where we are. I mean, our role is to incorporate digital biomarkers in R&D in clinical trials. Otherwise, I'm a pharmacist and neuropharmacologist by training, and I have more than 20 years of experience, in majority of that in pharma, 13 years in Vortis, and then some experience in medtech and health tech companies. Yeah, so looking forward to this meeting. And then Jean, shall I continue actually with the slides?
Yeah, you can share your screen, or shall I put the slides on the screen?
Okay, I will try to do it.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Just let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
So, of course, vocal biomarkers are, without doubt, are really on the forefront, actually, in the digital biomarkers field, because I'm sure everyone knows better even than me, but from voice, we can identify very promising features in terms of feature data that is really indicative for how diseases are developing, response to drugs, even kind of risk predictors, etc. So voice is definitely one of the most researched biomarker these days. And of course, we can capture voice through smartphone, through the sensors, different conversational agents, and other smart devices. I think one of the areas, and for me being neuropharmacologist, it's very exciting that one of the most probably researched disease where vocal biomarkers play is neurodegenerative disease. I'm working a lot on Parkinson, for example, where I'll give some examples later on. So that's quite promising. But I guess here my role is more to give the pharma perspective, and in terms of also what are the different applications of actually capturing those vocal biomarkers. And I would divide probably the applications in two big items. One, of course, is the clinical use or clinical practice, and the other one is clinical research. And I want to state from the very beginning, as you know, that these two areas, they're quite different in terms of how we develop tools to capture that and analyze this data, but also, in terms of regulatory path, acceptance, and many aspects around what we need to deliver those. What I mean is that in clinical use, definitely it's key to follow the medical device regulation, while in clinical research, it's mainly the V3 framework, which I will show later, and also how to use DHTs or biomeds in clinical trials. So there is a there is a different lens in terms of how we develop those tools. And I mean, in clinical use, definitely it's quite exciting also for pharma companies to be able to pre-screen the population and, for example, identify the disease much earlier. For example, if we speak about Parkinson, using voice, we can diagnose patients much earlier. And as you know, for example, in Parkinson, 90% actually of the patients are having any kind of voice disturbances or voice impairs, which gives the opportunity actually to capture early that disease. Of course, you can do risk prediction, you can monitor how the patients develop, how the disease develops, but also how they respond to treatment. In clinical research, I would say the goal could be a little bit different, where at the moment, at least my focus and the focus of Roche at the moment is really on developing novel digital measures or digital endpoints. And using them, we can accelerate significantly drug development, and you can see early signal, early separation of curves between drug and placebo, and you can significantly also decrease cost. So that's really probably the use case I will speak about more in the next slides. As I said, for Parkinson, the thing for Parkinson though in clinical trials is that we need to show convergent validity versus the standard scale, which is the MDS-UPDRS. And if you see that scale, there is much more than voice. I mean, you need to capture tremor, you need to capture different things which are happening to the disease, sleep patterns. I mean, you can capture also eye movements, face expression, rigidity in the arms, and speech, for example, as well, as I mentioned, but also cognition, which is one of the things we can capture in clinical trials. And the product that we use as I said, in Roche in clinical trials is trying to capture all these different measurement domains across some of the things I already mentioned. For example, if we measure bradykinesia, we can use the finger tapping or head turning test. If we want to measure tremor, we can measure tremor in the voice, but also during the postural stability test, tremor during rest, etc., and also the cognition. So from pharma perspective, for the goal of actually developing a novel endpoints that should correlate with the scale, we need to ensure that we capture more than just voice, exactly because of the reason I already mentioned. We need to stay close to the standard scale that measures the progression of that disease. And some of the important considerations when we speak about digital measures in clinical trials, of course, is, as I mentioned, the Digital Medicine Society framework, which is the V3+ framework for developing digital measures. I will show briefly later. Then, of course, it's very important to have regulatory acceptance or qualification, depending on strategy. We need to ensure that there is a scientific community acceptance, or whatever we really develop is meeting all the scientific standards and understanding about measurements. And one of the things which is key for my role is actually how we can achieve a good balance of these measurements versus the patient and site staff burden, for example, when you do clinical trials. So me and my team, we are really focused on developing proper trainings, but also how we shape that process from screening of the patients until the end in a way that's less burdensome for the clinical trial participants. As I mentioned already, the V3+ framework, of course, here the key part for anyone interested in developing these digital measures in clinical trials, it's a very long process. You need to go through very rigorous steps from technical verification, of course, usability validation, analytical validation, which is the validation where you're saying that the performance of your algorithm or what you're measuring is really what you intend to measure is what you measure. Of course, the clinical validation, if whatever you measure is clinically meaningful. And although there are just 4 steps, actually this takes a lot of time because you need to conduct clinical trials in order to be able to prove some of those steps. When we speak about the regulatory acceptance, there are, I would say, 2 major pathways for digital measures or RECOA. One is the IND acceptance pathway, which is just the pathway where for each individual drug development program, you go through submission and approval with the regulators. And here the potential is really just to support regulatory decision making for one specific program. While if you go to the other pathway, which is the qualification pathway, although it's much longer and I would say it takes much more effort and time, this is intended really within the specific context of use to be used in multiple drug development programs. And I mean, it's being reviewed and endorsed just one by regulators, but then it can be used within the same context of use once it's qualified. And just briefly, because I was told that I just briefly about the process. If we try to illustrate both EMA on the left and then FDA on the right, I put here like 4 steps, but I mean, it could be that's just my read of it. Of course, it can be put in a different format. But I would say in the beginning, it's more the pre-inquiry where you already have the context of use and scope. You have certain idea what your digital measure is going to measure, and then you submit with FDA is called also letter of intent. In Europe, it's more like the innovation task force, where both regulators are reviewing your initial data. And they in the following steps they are going to give you initial feedback about that, or if something needs to be corrected. Then as the following steps are really more detailed discussions around the context of use. So in FDA, there is this critical path innovation meeting, or in Europe is the scientific advice working party, where both are going through this. They're giving you really advice on about the context of use and the path forward. And the next step is really working with the regulators on the evidence plan. What evidence you need to collect and submit in order to be able to qualify that digital measure. And final step, of course, is if we speak about the European Union, is around the CHMP recommendation, and they issue opinion about the qualification of that digital measure. And so far, at least up to my knowledge, there is just one digital measure which was qualified by EMA, and it's called stride velocity 95th centile, and that it was qualified as a primary endpoint in studies in Duchenne. So that was a huge success back then in 2023. Since then, I don't at least know for more such cases. But also, of course, there were some disruptions now in the whole regulatory landscape recently. So in general, I think that most of the companies are more going towards the other pathway right now. So probably the qualification path is not that much explored. At least that's my impression. Because also for this specific measure, I think it took them around 10 years or more actually to reach that state. So that's for me just as an opening. And looking forward to the other speakers and also to the discussion later. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. There we go. So please free to join the discussion anytime when it's out. Thank you for your perspective. Mihaly, from your regulatory perspective, from your regulatory experience, What do you see as the biggest shift in evidence requirement when transition from the pharma trial environment towards, for example, the MDR certification or other like CE mark frameworks?
Yes, I just before diving in that, I want to build on the previous talk about qualification. Indeed, there are not that many people that take the journey of qualification, because the example of strike velocity took them 10 years. Yet in Europe, it is the place to go for qualification, because the system is really set and very efficient, actually. You can close your qualification on average about in 2 years, from qualification advice to qualification opinion. Once you have the qualification opinion, you can use it as is while staying in that context of use. In the US, they have multiple programs on qualifications, yet it takes even longer than the 10 years of Duchenne. It can take 4 to 7 years, and not necessarily coming to a primary endpoint. So that's an important clarification to make. Now, to respond to your question about MDR, once you use your digital endpoint in clinical trials, you have a very defined and clean, controlled environment. You have a homogeneous population. You have also safety guards, because you go for an ethics committee review. You have a regulatory review. So it is a very controlled environment. Hence, you limit the risk. Once you are in the real world, which is under the remit of the MDR, the tool can be used basically by everybody, and that has other caveats. So the obligation comes also with a long-term follow-up, where the clinical trial is defined in time, and you have a post-marketing vigilance system to be in place, similar to medicines once you have put them on the market. So the framework is different, just to clarify that point.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. Picking up on this insights from your point as an innovator and the tech builder in Sana, do you think it is possible to keep the demand from both the part of the clinical trials and medical device regulation, and what the hurdles and struggles that you are maybe facing in Sana?
I think it's challenging, because you need to have a clear focus in order to bring the device to the market. And as you see, as we hear, the processes are certainly different. The scope, as Mireille mentioned, in the MDR, you also have a surveillance process and a plan that you have to keep updating. I think it's important from the start to certainly talk to the stakeholders and the parties, because for pharma, in terms of the vocal biomarkers, would mostly land into the space of the digital endpoint, in the best case secondary endpoint or exploratory endpoint, because primary will be, at least with the evidence so far, difficult. And then with the MDR, of course, it's a different kind of jungle. Then you have the real world data, and then you have the real world usage. So I think it's important to talk to the stakeholders in order, as a company and as a product, to shape to have clarity as soon as possible, because based on the expectations and based on the value proposition, the business model that you're building, then you will focus on that product. We have actually tried from the start to talk to various stakeholders, as I mentioned, from both domains, in order to understand where is the easier market entry, or what is the value proposition that we can give from the start. So I think it's important to decide on that as early as possible, and then focus on that route, on that channel, because then accordingly you need to put the effort, you need to put the resources. It's a long time for each of those. If you go for the MDR, or even for that, you have to build the evidence, and it takes years to get the clinical study, to get the funding, to get the results. And if you're ending up with an evidence that pharma doesn't need, or the notified body will clear you out on the assessment, then all of it is not a good news. So early work to validate it, but then focus on really building that evidence and that value proposition. in a very sharp way. That would be my.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Sam, your position is really important for us as entrepreneurs and as developers of the any kind of the devices that will be applied in the hospitals. And you are working with Julia, helping her with the implementation with the clinical path, digital care path that you are implementing in Maastricht, UMC. So how do the real world validation needs how do the real world validation needs of a hospital clinician operating under these workflows, tight workflows, differs from the clinical trial perspective regarding the rigid data or the regulation perspective?
Thank you. Yeah, so we all think, well, once you have a clinical validation study, you're there, but that's just the beginning. I think a lot of things happen. The trials are, as you mentioned, homogeneous. Everybody has the same goal, the same aim, same interest. And once you get into the arena of implementation, there are, of course, diffuse interest and even competing interest. You have different pace. In clinical care, you want to maintain the status quo. There are different outcomes. A lot of people talking about accuracy, whereas implementation has different outcomes. So when you talk about implementation, you need to take into account there's different type of research going on and different types of outcomes. And the discussion is a lot about what's implementation. So my role is mainly like aligning language between the engineers, the trialists, and the hospitals. And so that's very important to get it aligned. Yeah.
What is the biggest difficulty in the communication?
Words, actually, words so different. Even when you talk about data, for an engineer, it's different than for a clinician. So there are different. So first align words, align interest, and then start working. If I may, still one.
Yes.
The thing is, there is a huge gap between the clinical validation and implementation. There's no room to, let's say, play around. Okay, does this work? And we'll come back to that. You need some process of in the hospital of guiding that path from validation to implementation. If it's not there, then you're bound to fail.
Thank you. Amanda, you have also a specific view from the both parts as an innovator and as a speech language pathologist. So from your perspective as an SLP, what is, when we are talking about the specifics of the vocal biomarkers or speech biomarkers, what do you need to see to actually trust these systems and to convince the colleague of yours to be able to implement and use these systems on a day-to-day workflows?
I think as clinicians, our first priority, what we want, is to help our patients. This is the top thing that we want to achieve. And whether we have a standardized test that we know works for years and we take it and we use it with our patients, or an innovative tool that we know that it's standardized and we're going to implement, we want it to make sure that it will not risk our credibility. It will give us good results. So, of course, we want it to be validated. We want to make sure that we know what it measures. We don't want just a score or a black box that just tells us it works, but we want to link it with what exactly it measures. How is it? I want to understand the tool. I want to understand why it makes sense for me to use it for this patient, so I can actually explain to the patient why they need to use it or why it is helping them. So I want this transparency a little bit into what is happening behind in the engine a little bit, not the IP, of course, but we want to know that. And then I think beyond trust, I want to know that it will help me, and it will help me be efficient with my time and with my workflow. Otherwise, even if it is fantastic and it works very well, if it makes me leave the work later, or if it makes me have more work to do, or it takes me out of my normal workflow, and I have to do a protocol of 15 things that I have now been able to do in 5 steps, I wouldn't do it. I would skip it, or I would do it in a way that it's not linked to the standardization protocol, and the results will not be the same.
Can I add
Sure.
to it? In the workflow, so I've done a lot of some like digital implementations. The ones that were successful were the ones that intuitively were capturing the workflow, whereas the ones that were successful, no workflow alignment. So that's a really important point.
Our experience also, when we tried to put like a technology to the clinicians, it was really complicated to convince them to use it because it was too complicated. Once we started to change the workflow and to improve their workflow on a daily basis, we started to build also some kind of the trust because they see it was easy to understand and it was solving the biggest pain in the daily basis. We are finalizing our first topic, first round. So please, if you have any questions, feel free to ask our excellent panelists.
I have one question on AI. So once your software is MDR certified, is there any short track in terms of qualification opinion in clinical trials, or you just start from zero?
No, actually, you don't even need to be necessarily CE marked to be used in clinical trial. That just to clarify that part. And on the other side, you can or not be CE marked and then go for qualification. There is no restriction on that. The EMA per se has no authority or has limited authority on the medical devices because they are managed by notified bodies, public and private, in the 27 member states. So now that it's a separate path, yet the Commission is trying to, with the Combine initiative, I don't know if you have heard about that, it's trying to put a common umbrella on that, which is the Combine initiative.
And from my experience, there are various tools, probably Benny will also elaborate on what they're doing at Roche, that have the CE mark and then they are embedded or integrated into clinical trials for real-world data collection. So the CE mark is a good threshold to build without going through the email.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes?
Yeah, I have two quick questions. Number one, yes, from yesterday's presentation, it seems that some researchers have very skeptical ideas on the industry. So my question one is how those industry representatives can convince those skeptical researchers that the gap can be filled. Because it's very difficult, because if the researchers are skeptical, maybe the development of the technology will be slowed down. And number two, the topic is entering the European market. You are saying entering the European Union market or entering the European member states market. That's very different. Because having the European Union legislation is more difficult than having the member states legislation. Because I've been doing European studies for 20 years. That's why I want to know whether your target is European Union level or member state level. Because not all member states are as liberal as the Netherlands. Not all the professors are as liberal as this.
That's really complex questions. So I will just repeat the first one also for the recordings. How should the innovators and industry leaders convince the skeptical researchers to put an effort towards the application of the VOCA biomarkers towards the clinical environment? Okay. Certainly, you want to?
Yeah. Well, so I think I can share a bit what we did. So I think first you can do it within your research. So what we did, we first built the data, then we built synthetic cases and presented that to the clinicians, and then together. So they fear when it's their own patient, but you can build synthetic, you can build fake patients based on like improvement, and through the iterations, we build trust, and we did similarly with patients. So I think. Aligning them and building your company or building your evidence from the start, it helps. And then what we see that because of clinicians, they think in a frame as they already. So for me, CPD, I would see a patient and would see them like a week later. Whereas with digital care, you could see them within an hour or in a minute. So you really need to, let's say, retrain their brains to think more in the way you want them to think. And the only way is to do it together with them.
May I specify one thing and kind of like differentiate? I don't see a skepticism between the research group and the industry or the builders. There's more of a skepticism about the clinical practice and the industry putting them, because the researchers, from our experience in various years, there is a very good synergy. You can work very well with research group to develop research, to have really ambitious project, innovative project, because in the way you're still into a controlled environment. The skepticism, of course, builds around when you will then apply it into the real world setting with the patients. And this, the group there is not so much the researcher, but the clinical practice, the hospital, and so on, which of course have a different set of standards, different set of expectations. And then of course, this will come also with other requirements that you have to fulfill. And when it comes to validation, certification is one of them, but only one factor. There are of course other factors. Just wanted to differentiate on that.
And the second question was quite complex, so maybe just short answer, because this is like another topic. So regarding the difficulties and differences, even with the same framework of the MDR certification, medical device regulation, and that it is not the same in Europe and European Union participating countries. So yeah, we are facing the differences, or starting the differences between even the European Union and, for example, UK, and within the European Union. And I think it's really important, once again, to find the champions in the hospitals that will help you with the implementation. So maybe, Amir, if you can try to address these differences. Do you have an experience between these differences between the countries in the adoption of the MDR certification and different people?
Definitely, they are very different. You have some leading countries, and I would, of course, if you have a specific expertise in a member state, then tap on that, use it, maximize it. In the UK, you have also very good university centers. In Germany, the same. You're in the Netherlands, you have a very good network that you can really mobilize to get where you want to go. So that would be my recommendation.
Thank you. Regarding the overcoming barriers and go-to-market strategies and real-world pitfalls, Amanda, what is the biggest design or workflow mistake that tech developers or innovators make when they're trying to hand actually the tools that were already developed to the clinicians?
I think the mistake is exactly the fact that they have developed something and then they try to ask someone to implement it. And many times the way the solution, the platform has been developed is not even matching. It's very cool. The technology is cool. We are always, as clinicians, really fascinated, but then it is not matching at all what you're doing in practice. So that's the biggest barrier. And then if you are someone who just graduated, for example, if you're a new clinician and you're very keen to try things, but also you're either really needing to tick all the boxes of the protocol and do everything, it's very, very hard to have a critical mindset of what I need to implement and what I can take and use. If you are a very experienced clinician, you have a very standard workflow, no way you can change it. It's very hard to adjust and adapt. So both cases are difficult. And I wanted to mention that when we were all saying that you need to find a champion. But who is the champion? Because a very young clinician is really keen and very interested, but doesn't know how to critically take the best out of the solution or help you really as a developer or as a company do the right thing. But a very experienced also might be less open to try things. So you need to find something in the middle, I suppose, that really knows the workflow but can adapt. Mm-hmm. And I think co-designing with clinicians, like you do with any solution that needs to go to the market, you do not design something and try to sell it. You understand the problem, you understand the workflow, you understand what you're really solving, and then you have a deep interview, or you have very good work with the person or the persona that you're building for, and you are creating the solution with them. This is the only way to do it.
I would like to underline here that the co-designing with the clinicians, this is really like important part, not only during the development of the system, but also during the designing the research projects that are like trying to take the fundamental models or fundamental knowledge of the technology towards the application approaches. Because if you will overlook the look of the clinicians during the co-designing, even of the application and research, then you will have really big difficulties during the development phase and then the adaptation phase, which is quite complicated. So this is really important and one of the maybe nice key takeaways from this roundtable. Sami, what is the biggest operational blind spot regarding the data privacy infrastructure or electronic health record, which is also like a benchmark these days in Europe, and the integration and the complications from the hospital perspective regarding these issues?
Yeah, so I think you've mentioned a lot of stakeholders here.
You can pick one.
Well, I think it's really good that you mentioned all of are all involved. I think the most important thing is that you have within your hospital a process to navigate. If there is another process, you will encounter a clinician who is either young or old or whatever, but doesn't know how to navigate who he needs to or she needs to approach. For instance, we have in our hospital, we have innovation loops where SMEs can just join, and we have within 1 to 2 years, within a month, you can get iterative steps and get everyone on board, and you can, let's say, there's to bridge the gap from validation to implementation, there is, let's say, room in a way, but everybody needs to see that space. So you need to organize that within your hospital. That's the main, I think, for me, blind spot, and that really helped me to accelerate every digital care pathway we have been implementing. So structure, process,
Maybe later on we can have a discussion about the electronic health records, because this is the problematic itself, which is quite interesting these days. But let's continue. Julia, to build in like Excel models means that nothing in the company basically goes under. And we know that at the end of the process are always like money and revenue and the coverage of the costs, which is really important to think also during the design, because this is what is like fueling all the research underneath and everything. So from the startup perspective, what was the most painful commercial barrier regarding the European economics or the reimbursement models in your case, and how far you are in this process?
Well, the problem of the reimbursement is that there's no reimbursement for vocal biomarkers or also many digital measures of that point. We're trying, of course, it's worth mentioning that as a startup, as a company bringing, commercializing such solution, we're all navigating two main difficulties. On the one is the regulatory pathway, because we are assuming as if MDR is like such clarified and it's everything is like clear, but actually to bring an AI model also within the MDR, it has its own challenges. So that's one thing. And then when it comes to the commercial part that you mentioned, there are of course no clear reimbursement if you want to basically commercialize the vocal biomarker part, since it's our topic here. So of course you try to fit into models that accommodate your solution so that you can bring it to the market early, maybe also in some ways before the MDR, and then with the MDR, for example, in our case, with a remote patient monitoring framework, or in other projects where you can also validate your commercial or your business model through real world data collection, surveillance, also of medication, trying to measure their efficacy when they are on the market. So I think because we are lacking clear reimbursement strategies to that aspect, you as a company, of course, try to, as I mentioned, to fit into these other models to basically make it work. And of course, I think at the end of the day, still have clarity on what would be your end goal, because this is where you want, what you want to work towards and to scale, you know.
Yeah. So basically during the development of the medical device, anything. Yes?
Question after you're done.
Here you go.
Of course.
Let's
Yes,
do
yes.
interactive.
Oh, sure.
Archie, hi. I wanted to move the conversation away from clinical practice to pharma, and maybe because we have
Yes.
here.
Excellent.
Thank you. So on the one hand, we're talking a lot about integration of clinical pathways, but then there is the clinical trial aspect of it, which I know that our unit is actually working with. So there's a couple of us here who are interested in that space. Now, obviously, with pharma, when you're looking at a cohort of patients, and especially a smaller cohort of patients with some certain conditions, it's hard to actually reach those patients when they're being put on a new drug, for example. So the way to do that is through a pharma trial. It's not necessarily looking at an existing patient cohort within the hospital population. Now, pharma, as you know, is extremely risk averse. So the only way in which we can actually get into those trials is if you have a absolute massive problem that pharma has and they need a solution for it, or you need to have a shadow biomarker, exploratory biomarker, whatever you might call it. But how do we work with pharma to actually give us time of day to include us in those trials? I think that is the big question here. Because there's a lot we can do. Shen was actually GSK, so I don't know why you went into Shen. And then there's another one, which is Procter & H, which is Pfizer. So that was the pharma company that worked getting that done. Whereas for ideas, innovators want to be able to introduce new digital endpoints with pharma, which necessarily might not have thought about. In COPD, coming back to libraries, Sunny, thank you for that. Every time I use the word spirometry, I used to get knocked on the head and said, you're not pure volume. How is spirometry? Right? So you have to use the words acoustic biomarker surrogate, analytic, whatever, analog. So that's a theology problem, but if you use that new word inside a protocol, we'll have 20 people calling on you for that. So I think we talk a lot about clinical practice, but I think we need to dig a little bit more into how we can get into these clinical trials for new drugs, but there are small defined populations which we cannot reach through hospital systems.
Okay, I will try to repeat your question. So also the online participants can hear. Maybe Wenceslav, this is probably the question for you. So how we can reach the pharma and how we can integrate better and in maybe easier way into the process of the clinical trials to outreach the patient. They are not like quite common, hospitals and then research projects, and they're quite like with rare diseases, for example, and everything. So Wenceslav, if you are hearing us, are you willing to answer this question? Okay, perfect.
Yeah, so I think there are many aspects. I don't know if we have enough time, of course, but for sure it's much easier early on. I mean, especially if there is a drug involved. Because there are two different setups, right? One setup is just doing trials with a particular patient population without a drug. And then if a drug is involved. So if a drug is involved, then it's much more difficult to actually engage with pharma because obviously the risk for them is much higher. Then, of course, the second layer, which is important, is the hierarchy of that measurement, where that measurement is positioned in the clinical trial protocol. So if we speak anything beyond exploratory, it becomes very difficult, right? Because if you go to secondary and primary, then if you go through this V3 plus framework, practically you need already to have a lot of evidence around the analytical validation, clinical validation. Of course, another requirements are around your computer system validation and all the requirements coming from digital health technologies in clinical trials. So all these different frameworks and requirements should be explored before you can go really in a drug trial, especially in a higher hierarchy. And then, of course, another different layer is which phase is the trial. Because if we speak about phase 3, I mean, even at the moment, I cannot recall a lot of phase 3 programs actually leveraging, digital measures beyond exploratory, exactly for that reason. But if you go phase 2, because phase 2, for example, or late phase 1, it's mainly for internal decision making. Probably pharma will be a little bit more open, because that's not really a trial where you need so strong, let's say, regulatory endorsement, especially if it's exploratory. In many cases, you even probably don't report some of your exploratory endpoints with regulators in phase 1 and 2. So that's an opportunity. In order to finalize what I'm saying, I think if you try to go, if you are targeting a drug trial, because if you want to monitor drug effect, for example, using the measure, if you go to a drug trial, I would go early. And I would try to position it as, okay, let's start from the very beginning, and then bring it along the development of the drug, because then this will also give you time to work on your evidence package, validation, verification, whatever you need to do with your product. But also you're able in the early phases to gain trust and also prove that you can do it, that your product is good, you can deliver it. So beyond also this all validation aspects, I think another important aspect is also, for example, if you incorporate your measure into the trial, then how is it from, what is the experience for that pharma company? Do they have really, less problems around execution, technical issues, glitches, whatever, depending on the tool you're using? Then do they have really easy access to the data? How they receive the data? Do they receive the data in a timely manner? So really, there are many different aspects. And as I said, I would say if you want to start, I would target early trials where pharma, they're, I think, open to do exploratory research in the early phases. But you need to cover a minimum set of requirements around the mainly technical verification, probably a little bit of analytical validation and computer system validation.
Nick has a question here.
Sure.
I think it's the statement on that point when I collaborated with pharma within this space. I mean, I can probably get away with thinking with working here, we're not giving the evidence they want in groups and trials. I'm told that by trials teams in my own department. I'm told that by pharma companies. We're just not delivering evidence. Again, we're over-focused on machine learning outcome, which is helpful. And then other things I've seen when we've tried to integrate companies into trials, like the product might take, our protocol's 10, 15 minutes long. When people are going through a trial and doing multiple tests, that can be seen as an overburden for something that has a low evidence at the moment. So it's a few things like that coming together. It's like, we all say speech is quick and easy to collect, but then we do a 15-minute protocol with various different vocal exercises in it. That's not quick and easy to collect. And then, the data ownership and all of these things come into it, and it's a big question. Again, the way we're sort of set up, we're not doing ourselves that many favors to potentially get as quickly to trials as we need.
And can I ask you, so for you, what is the minimal required evidence that's necessary? Have you had this conversation already?
Not going to say that one out loud.
Oh, okay, I'm wondering.
That gives away too much of my knowledge.
So after the roundtable, we can resume that's a good question.
I need to run to another.
Sure. We are running out of time, but I want to ask one particular question, Mireille, because I think this is really, really, really important regarding the designing, the research, and also the clinical trials towards the medical device regulation. And because we know that this can be like one of the most expensive parts of the development. And I would like to ask you, from your perspective, what is the most common expensive regulatory mistake during the academic research teams that make during the entry labs that can actually influence the entire process of the development of any kind of the system?
Yes, so treating early data collection as research only is probably one of the major mistakes. So if you don't follow good laboratory practice, which is quite common, so I hope you all follow those. If you have a well-documented system that you are really tracking in such a way that it's regulatory auditable, That's one key factor to keep in mind. And the second one is tweaking the algorithm without necessarily having a version control, also systematically tracking what has changed, why it has changed. So it's just common scientific sense. It's nothing rocket science, but if you have everything which is documented, traceable, legible, actually, if you are following the Alcoa plus principle, I hope you are all familiar with those, then you should be in a relatively safe space.
And I have one question for the audience, because most of us are researchers and we are trying to design our research projects and the data management system in line with all the principles that we know. But then I have just like one question. When it goes to reality, we start to collect the data. How many of you are trying to find some shortcuts during the data management system and taking the data from the real clinical world? So just like raise your hand if you were pushed towards these shortcuts due to the term of the time or the final shortcuts on everything. So did you have to make some shortcuts in the data management system? No, really not. So maybe we are the two only on this people. Maybe we have to learn from you. So everyone here has like perfect data management system, is following all the rules. They're trying to build the data secure, anonymized, and everything like it's as it should be.
I have something to add. Maybe I would say that the people are not making shortcuts, but they are not even aware what are the requirements.
That's actually quite.
I think that they believe they are doing everything 100% correct.
There was a question?
It's just a comment, because I'm Ellie, and I'm also patient, and I'm involved with consulting with engineers. It's very interesting because they, when we were designing our study, one of the first questions was like, let's calculate the sample size. Right?
Okay.
And for the engineer perspective, it was like, don't worry, get as much data and but from the clinician perspective, it's completely unethical, and we need to mathematically plan our study ahead, and like Dr. Simmons and Amanda mentioned, like we have our evidence-based practice medicine, right? So we need proper evidence to base the choices, so we trust the studies. So I think I'm the one, as a clinician, the one always trying to push forward data collection to make sure we are actually waiting for it. But the engineering and the tech part of the team, they're always like, let's just get data. We need data, just count things. And it's not exactly like that. So I think the communication thing I think is actually a key message from this round table. And I think it's very challenging to reach all different perspectives, different perspective. And as you mentioned pretty well, maybe some are doing things that they're not quite right, but because they're unaware of it. How can we deal with it? Where suggestions to try to reach and improve our communication, since we all know this problem. How to resolve it?
I'm sorry, I probably won't be able to repeat these comments for the recordings. Are there any questions or comments?
The question was on how to strengthen that communication.
Okay.
So maybe we can follow up. My experience would be, of course, engaging as much as possible with the researcher on one side, but also the potential customers on the other side. Because what we saw here, I think the startups and the builders are a good proxy between the two, and a useful instrument for the researchers, because as we're saying, at the end of the day, we want to, as researchers, we want to push the boundaries, want to have good research, but at the end of the day, we want to have it applicable, in the real world. And as we already mentioned, if you start already with a bad trial design and with endpoints that are not useful at all, then I think it is doomed to fail in terms of applicability. So the startups and the builders are a good proxy with the other industry partners to give you that kind of like validation of the endpoints of the trial design. And that communication, one instrument I would say is of course to build it through innovation and research projects. I think the researchers are always very excited to work with the industry on that. At least that has been our experience. And of course, pointing out to initiatives such as this, we've had the Bridge to AI, now we have eVoiceNet. This is exactly the purpose of this 4-year initiative, right? To get us all in this room and communicate and say, okay, let's do something together next quarter or next year. So at least these two, I'd say. And maybe a final shout out to initiatives such as Deep Measures, because I've been engaged with Deep Measures and the company where Miri is working, also pointing to the question from Arshia, how to get that entry to pharma. And they are a spin-off of pharma, and they build exactly this platform that early on we as startup can go and co-design with pharma partners. What is the context of use? What are the indicators? What is the evidence we want to build? So you co-create with that. That is also another bridge for communication.
And you should not only keep in mind the regulatory is the first step, but after that you have the reimbursement problem. And actually, here digital measures can really make a difference, even more than for the regulatory approval. So for reimbursement, especially now with the implementation of the health technology regulation, it is the moment. So take the chance to move.
And I think one part also that we didn't stress enough is we're talking communication clinician to technology person, and then frontline research, and then the regulatory and reimbursement. And we didn't stress enough, I think, also the technical officer of the hospital, or the person who is responsible in the hospital, not the technology person who is doing the research, but the one who is going to implement, who has their own languages and priorities. And most of the projects stop there just because of privacy or of any cloud restrictions. And you can build the best research project. You can find the best champion in the hospital that will we'll use it for 3 months. We'll do a fantastic pilot, and then you can even get reimbursement. And then the technology responsible person in the hospital will just shut it down. There are so many things that we need to be able to learn, I think, as clinicians, and change a little bit our mindset. And we can only change ourselves, so we cannot expect from other people to learn. Let's start by maybe learning about other people's work and their priorities, and bridge the gap, I suppose.
Excellent. We are running out of the time, so maybe one last question from the audience, also from online audience, if you want to ask a question. So please, if you have anything. If not, let's wrap up this roundtable with the lightning round and key takeaways from all the panelists. So maybe Ventislav, I will ask you, what should be like the specific takeaways from the Roche perspective, or from the perspective of the clinical trials? Can you pinpoint 1, 2, or 3 most important take-home actions or messages?
Yeah, so I think for people who are developing vocal biomarkers, I think in the end, I think the V3+ framework is very useful if you want to really prove that the product you have is fit for purpose. Because as I said, in pharma, you can leverage vocal biomarkers in different types of settings and different purposes. But if you want to prove you're fit for purpose, I would recommend going through that framework and then really prove that whatever you measure is really intended to be measured, and then it's really clinically meaningful, and your sensor that you're using is really capturing whatever it's expected to capture. So in that framework, it's really well described all these different aspects of what you need to think about digital measures in trials.
Excellent. Thank you, Mireille.
So as I already said, solid documentation, sound scientific question, and also see the regulatory framework as a continuum. It doesn't end at the regulatory step. You have to see what comes next, and the bridge to clinical practice, as Amanda just said. So it's a continuum.
Thank you. Ria?
Maybe a little bit more philosophical. Building in healthcare is not easy, it's challenging. And I usually say it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So for us all, I'd say just keep your breath, not hold it, keep it. Use your voice to talk to as many as others, and be patient and focused. And yeah, use the opportunity to connect as much as possible. That would be my, follow.
Excellent, very nice. Sami?
Yeah, maybe use your curiosity as a researcher into clinic. So I've been talking to the ICT architecture since a couple of years now. Oh, this is very difficult, but be very, look up your local stakeholders, talk to them and try to really understand what's driving them and take that to help you implement the biomarkers.
And finally, Amanda, thank you.
And think of why you're creating what you're creating, who is going to benefit exactly, and what is the problem that is going to solve for this person.
Excellent, excellent. So I would like to thank you, our panelists, for the participation and for the useful insights. Also, I would like to thank you, our online participants. And Venti already had left because I had another meeting at the level, but also thank you to him. And I would like to thank you, Jezime Kiska, for helping us to organize this event and to push everything towards the eVoiceNet ecosystem. And also thank you for the participation, and feel free to communicate and network with our panelists during the coffee breaks and until the end of the event. And I wish you all the best for the rest of the eVoiceNet. Thank you.